She was 20 and had just been kicked out. Not sent off with a blessing and a little money, kicked out a door that shut behind her into a country that had already taken everything her family had. And with $1 silver, the last coin she owned, she bought a dead prospector's locked trunk at a sheriff's sale in the high desert of eastern Oregon. A battered iron-strapped box nobody in the room would bid on. The lid was locked and the key was gone. The man who had owned it had died, broke in a rented bed with 30 years of failure behind him. The auctioneer told her that everybody in that country knew Obadiah Renn had never found a thing in his life, that the trunk was a dead man's rubbish, and that a girl with $1 had just wasted it in front of witnesses. But what nobody knew, not the auctioneer, not the town, not the girl herself, was that locked inside that battered trunk was something that would change her life forever. Before we continue, if stories like this mean something to you, hit subscribe and tell us in the comments where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. Junia Alder had watched a country dry up and take her family with it, and she never afterward looked at a green field the same way. She was born in 1871 on a homestead in the high desert of eastern Oregon, in the sagebrush country where the rain came when it felt like it, and mostly did not. And she grew up understanding water the way children in other places understand money. It was the only subject in that house: how much was in the cistern, whether the creek would run in August, whether the well was dropping. Her father had filed on 160 acres of good-looking ground in a wet year, the way thousands did, and had spent the next 15 years learning what everyone in that country learned eventually, that the land was not the asset. The water was. And they did not have any. They hauled it. That was Junia's childhood, in one word. From the time she was 6, she rode the water wagon with her father, 11 miles each way to a neighbor's spring that the neighbor let them use on sufferance. 2 barrels at a time, 3 days a week, forever, she learned to read the country for it, the darker green of a seep, the willows that meant something underground, the way a certain grass grew where the water was near. It was the only useful knowledge she ever got, and she got it the hard way, 11 miles at a time, watching her father's back bend a little further every year under a problem that no amount of work could solve. She learned the arithmetic of it, too, the way a child learns a thing that is talked about at every meal. 2 barrels was 80 gallons. 80 gallons was 3 days for a family of 4, a garden, a milk cow, and 4 horses. And it was never enough, and so the garden went first, and then the cow, and by the last years the horses drank before anybody washed. She remembers her mother rationing a basin, wash the faces, then the hands, then the smallest child, then the clothes, then the floor. And then the last gray inch went on the 2 apple trees her mother had planted the year they filed, which she kept alive for 11 years out of pure stubbornness, and which died in the second dry summer within a week of each other. Junia found her mother sitting between them, not crying, just sitting. And she understood even at 15 that something had gone out of her mother that year that was not going to come back. The other thing she learned, and this one shaped everything, was that the water was there. Not on their place, but 11 miles away, on ground no better than theirs. A spring ran year-round out of a rock, and the man who owned it did not deserve it, and had not earned it, and had simply filed on the right 160 acres in a country where nobody could tell 160 from another. That was the whole cruelty of that land, and Junia understood it early. Everything depended on water, and nobody could see it, and so it was all a lottery. Whether your family lived or loaded a wagon came down to a thing nobody could look at. She used to lie awake and think that somewhere under their own dry ground there was probably water too, 400 yards off, 60 feet down, and no living person could tell them so. The dry years of the late 80s finished them, as they finished half that country. The creek quit. The well went to mud. Her mother died in the second bad summer, of a thing the doctor called exhaustion and Junia called 11 miles each way. and her father, who was not a hard man but was a beaten one, held on 2 more years and then let the mortgage take it and went to work for wages at a stock outfit 40 miles off and could not keep a 19-year-old daughter in a bunkhouse. He put her with his sister in the town of Sagahen, and that was supposed to be temporary. It lasted a year. Her aunt had 4 children of her own and a husband who worked when he chose to, and a niece was an extra plate at a table that was already short. It ended the way these things end, without a crime to point to, a bad harvest, a lost job, a woman at the end of her rope counting mouths. Junia was told, on a January morning, that she would have to make her own way, and when she said she had nowhere to go, her aunt said that neither did anyone, and shut the door. She was 20. She had a carpet bag, a coat that had been her mother's, and $1 silver she had earned scrubbing at the hotel, and had been keeping against exactly this. She went to the sheriff's sale because it was warm in there, and because she had nowhere else to be that morning. That is the whole of the reason. It was a small, dismal auction of a dead man's effects, held in the back of the feed store in Sagahen. A mule, a set of worn tools, a saddle, a cot, and, last, a trunk. The auctioneer, a brisk man named Merritt Skaggs, did not even try with the trunk. He set it on the boards and told the room what it was, the property of Obadiah Renn, deceased, Prospector, who had come into that country 30-odd years back and had walked it end to end ever since looking for color and had never once found any, and who had died the previous month in a rented bed at the boarding house owing 3 weeks. The trunk was locked, and the key was not among his effects. And the room laughed a little, in the way small towns laugh at a man who has been a fixture and a failure for 30 years, and somebody said that whatever was in there, it wasn't gold, because Obie Renn never found an ounce of anything in his life. Skaggs asked for $1 and got silence. And Junia Alder, standing at the back with $1 in her fist and no place on earth to be that night, heard something in that silence that she did not expect. Not opportunity. She was not thinking about treasure. She had grown up in that country, and she believed the room. She believed Obadiah Renn had never found gold. What she heard was the sound of a whole town agreeing that a man's entire life was worth nothing, out loud, over his own trunk, 6 weeks after he died. She had been told the same thing about herself in January, on a doorstep, in almost the same tone. She had seen him, too. That was the part she did not say to anyone for years, because it sounded foolish. She had seen Obadiah Renn 100 times without ever speaking to him, a thin old man with a satchel and a rock hammer, coming into Sagahen for supplies twice a season and going out again. Walking, always walking, in a country where every other man rode. The children of that town threw the word at him the way children do. She had heard grown men in the feed store make the same joke about him for years. The joke about Obie Renn finding his fortune any day now, and she had never once thought about it, because he was a fixture, like the water tower, and you do not think about the water tower. And now he was dead, and here was his trunk, and the room would not give $1 for it, and Junia Alder found that she was suddenly, unaccountably furious, not on his behalf exactly, but at the ease of it, the way a life could be summed up and dismissed by a room of people in about 4 seconds, which was exactly what had been done to her. She raised her hand and said $1. Merritt Skaggs looked at her and looked at the room, and had the decency to ask her twice if she meant it, and she said she did, and he took her silver $1 and made a note in his book and told her, not unkindly, that she'd just bought a locked box that a dead failure kept his socks in, and that she could collect it out back. She could not open it that day. The lock was a good one, iron, and the key was gone, and she was a girl of 20 with no tools. She carried the trunk. It took her 4 rests to the shed behind the hotel where the cook let her sleep in exchange for the scrubbing, and she sat with it in the dark and got some idea of what she had done. $1. Everything she had. For a box. It was an old well driller named Wiley Stack who opened it for her 3 days later and Wiley Stack is the reason this story happened at all. He was somewhere past 70, and he had put down half the wells in that end of the county, and he was sitting outside the feed store when Junia came asking whether anybody in town had a tool for a lock. He asked, "Whose lock?" She told him, and the old man went quiet, and then he said that he had known Obie Renn for 30 years, that Renn had been the only man in that country who never once laughed at a dry hole, and that he would open the girl's trunk for nothing and be glad to. He brought a bar and a cold chisel, and it took him 20 minutes, and when the hasp finally gave and Wiley Stack lifted the lid, the two of them looked into the trunk of a man who had spent 30 years finding nothing. There was almost no gold in it. There was a small poke of dust in the corner, a few ounces, the accumulated scrapings of 3 decades, enough to bury him, which Junia understood at once was exactly why he had kept it, and which put a lump in her throat before she had seen anything else. The rest of the trunk was paper, notebooks, dozens of them. Small canvas-bound field books, stacked in tight rows, each one numbered and dated in a small tight hand, going back to 1859. And rolled beside them, in a canvas tube, a great many sheets of drawing paper. And on top of it all, a folded letter, weighted with a hand lens addressed in that same small hand to whoever gets this trunk, since there is no one else. Junia lifted out the top notebook before she read the letter, because she could not help it. It fell open in her hands to a page dated August 1874, and it was not what she expected at all, not the ravings of a man chasing color, but a page of the most patient observation she had ever seen, a paste bearing off a butte, a note on the rock, a small precise sketch of a draw, and a line at the bottom that read, "In that tight hand, seep runs to second week aug, dries, grass stays green 40 paces below, water not gone, only down. Water not gone, only down." She read that line 3 times, and something in her chest went strange, because she had been 6 years old and 11 miles from a spring when this man was writing it, and it was the exact thing she had lain awake thinking about her own family's dry ground. Junia Alder sat down on the shed floor and read the letter, and old Wiley Stack sat down on an upturned bucket and listened. "If you are reading this," it began, "then I am dead, and my things have been sold, and I would guess they did not fetch much. That is all right. I want to explain what is in this trunk before you throw it out, because it looks like nothing, and it is not nothing. And if you throw it out, then 30 years goes in the stove, and I would rather it did not. My name is Obadiah Renn, and everyone in this country will tell you I am a failure, and by the measure they are using, they are right. I came out here in 1859 to find gold, and I never found any worth the name. I have been 30 years at it. I am not bitter about it, and I do not want you to feel sorry for me, because somewhere around the 10th year I stopped looking for gold, and I never told anybody, and I have been doing something else ever since. Here is what happened," he wrote. "A prospector walks. That is the whole trade. You walk the country, every draw and rim and dry wash, year after year, and you look at the ground closer than any other living soul ever will. And in about my 10th year out here, I understood that I was walking over the same thing again and again and not seeing it, because I had my eyes trained for color and the country was trying to show me something else. Water. I have found water," he wrote, "everywhere in this country. Not creeks, anybody can find a creek. Seeps, springs that run 3 weeks in the spring and then hide. Places where the rock lies in such a way that it holds and can be reached. Old channels under the sage where a well would come in at 40 feet, when a well a quarter mile off would go dry at 200. I have found hundreds of them, and I began writing them down, and then I began mapping them, and I have not stopped for 20 years. He explained the system, and it was the system of a meticulous man with nothing else to do. The numbered field books held the raw record, the date, the location by pace, distance, and compass bearing off known landmarks, the character of the rock, the depth he judged water to lie. The flow he had measured in a season, and out of it, the plants growing, the tracks of animals that came there. And the rolled sheets were what he had made of it, a set of hand-drawn maps of every township he had walked, an area, Junia later worked out, the size of a small state, with every seep and spring and buried channel marked and cross-referenced to the notebooks by number. "Nobody knows this is here," he wrote. "I have tried to tell people, twice, and both times I saw what they saw, which was old Obie Renn who never found anything wanting to talk about his notebooks, and I could not stand it a third time, so I stopped trying. And then the part that Junia Alder would carry the rest of her life. I have watched families dry out and go," he wrote, "for 30 years. I have stood on a rim and watched a man load a wagon and take his wife and his children off a place he broke with his own hands, because his well went dry, and I have known, with the book in my pocket, that there was water on his own ground, 400 yards from his house, at 60 feet, in a channel he could not see, and I could. And I did not always tell him. I want to set that down honestly. Sometimes I told them and they did not believe me, and sometimes I did not tell them because I could not stand to be laughed at again, and every one of those is on me, and I have thought about it in the night for 20 years. So I am going to ask something of whoever has this trunk," he wrote, "and I have no way to make you do it and no money to pay you with. There is a poke in the corner. It is for burying me, and if the county has already done that, then it is yours, and I am glad of it. But the books are the thing. Somebody who can read a map and walk a country could take these books and go out and show people the water on their own ground. That is all. It is not a fortune, and it will not make you famous. It will just mean that some family that would have loaded a wagon and gone doesn't. I am 71 years old, and my legs are done, and I cannot do it. I have been 30 years finding this, and I could not get one person to look at it. Maybe you can. O. Renn, Sagian, Oregon. Junia Alder finished the letter and did not move for a long moment. And then, because she had grown up 11 miles each way from a neighbor's spring, and because her mother had died of it, and because her father had loaded a wagon and gone off a place he broke with his own hands, she put her face in her hands in a shed behind a hotel and cried until she could not breathe. Old Wiley Stack, well driller, 70-odd, sat on his bucket and let her. And then, when she was done, he reached over and picked up one of the field books, and opened it, and read a page, and Junia watched the old man's face change in a way she never forgot. He said, "I put down a dry hole for the Pettigrews in 81. 210 feet. Cost them everything they had, and they left the next spring." He turned the book around. There was an entry, dated 1878, 3 years before, the Pettigrew place, the draw behind the house, an old channel, water at 55 to 70 feet, good flow, marked with a small, careful sketch of the ground. Wiley Stack looked at that page for a long time. Then he said, quietly, that he had drilled in this country for 40 years, and that a well driller guesses, that everybody guesses, that the whole business was guessing and men's savings and mostly heartbreak, and that he was holding in his hands the first thing he had ever seen in his life that was not a guess. They started that spring. That is how it began, not with a grand plan, but with an old well driller and a homeless girl of 20 walking out to a place 8 miles from Sagan, where a family named Sowerby was 3 weeks from loading a wagon, with a field book and a hand-drawn map to tell them there was water on their own ground. The Sowerbys did not believe them. Nobody believed them, at first. That was the wall Obadiah Renn had never gotten over, and Junia hit it head-on within a week, a girl of 20 and an old man with a dead failure's notebooks, telling a desperate family where to dig. The Sowerbys had no money to pay for a well anyway, which as it turned out was the thing that saved it, because Wiley Stack, who was old and had no children and had spent 40 years drilling holes he knew were guesses, said he would put the well down for nothing, and if there was no water they had lost nothing but his time. Water came in at 62 feet. Renn's book had said 55 to 70. That well is still running. It is the reason there are Sowerbies in that county today. And it was, Junia said, for the rest of her life, the single most important hole ever put down in eastern Oregon, and not one person outside 3 families has ever heard of it. She was there when it came in. She always said afterward that people who have never hauled water cannot understand what happened in that yard, and she was probably right. The Sowerby woman had 4 children and a wagon half loaded in the barn, actually loaded, actually half packed, because they had set the date, and she stood at the edge of the hole with her arms folded and her mouth flat, not letting herself hope, for the better part of 2 days. And when the sand came up wet, and then wetter, and then Wiley Stack straightened up and said, in the flat way of a man who has been wrong 1,000 times and is afraid to be right, that they had it, the woman did not cheer. She went down on her knees in the dirt beside the hole and put both hands over her face, and her husband stood behind her with his hand on her head, and neither of them said anything for a long time. Junia Alder, 20 years old, watched a family not have to leave, and understood exactly what she was going to do with the rest of her life. After the Sowerby well, they did not have to convince anyone again. That is the way of it in a small, hard country. One proof, and the thing is real. Within a year, Junia Alder and Wiley Stack were working steadily, and within 3 the work had a shape she kept for the next 40 years. She did the reading and the walking, he did the drilling. She learned Renn's system from the inside, his shorthand, his bearings, his way of noting a rock, and then she learned to do what he had done, because the notebooks covered a great deal of country but not all of it, and the maps had gaps, and Obadiah Renn had trained her without ever meeting her. She walked. That was the job. She walked the draws and the rims and the dry washes with his books in a satchel and added to them, and by the end of her life the collection was not 30 years of one man's work, but 70 years of 2 people's, and the maps covered ground Renn had never reached. The walking took her 10 years to be any good at, and she was honest about that. In the beginning she was only a reader of another man's book. She could find the place Renn had marked and pace off his bearings and tell a family where to dig, and that was worth a great deal, but it was not the skill. The skill was standing in country nobody had ever written down and knowing. It came slowly, and then, all at once, the way these things do, the 5th year, on a rim above a draw that Renn had never walked, she looked at a stand of ryegrass and the set of the rock below it, and heard herself say, out loud, to nobody, 60 feet, maybe less. And 6 weeks later Wiley Stack brought in a well there at 58. And Junia sat down on a rock and laughed until she had to wipe her eyes, because a dead man she had never met had just finished teaching her a trade from inside a trunk. She kept his numbering. That mattered to her more than it probably should have. Her own field books picked up where his left off, book 41, in her hand, dated 1896, and she never started a new series, so that the whole 70 years reads as one continuous record by 2 people, and you have to look at the handwriting to see where one life ended and the other took it up. What it meant on the ground was families staying. That is the whole of it, and it does not sound like much until you count. Junia kept a tally in the back of the last notebook. She was Renn's student in that as in everything, and when she died the number of wells put down on his information, or on hers, was 341. She did not count the wells. She counted the families that did not load a wagon. They took payment when there was any, which was rarely. More often they took a share of a hay crop, or nothing, or a meal. She was never rich. She never wanted to be, and she said, when people asked, that a person who grew up hauling water 11 miles has a different idea of what wealth looks like, and hers was a running well on a place that was about to be abandoned. Wiley Stack worked with her for 19 years and never charged a family that could not pay, and when he died at 91 she put the money she had into a proper stone for him, and had them cut on it the only epitaph she thought he would have tolerated. He stopped guessing, and she did one other thing, which she considered the most important of all and which took her 20 years. She made them believe Obadiah Renn. She started small and petty. If she was honest, she could not bear the way that town said his name. She began by telling every family they helped whose books these were, and correcting anyone who called him Old Obi who never found anything. Then she began to write it down properly, an account of his method, his 30 years, the tally of what his work had done, and she got it printed at her own expense in a pamphlet and later, when she was old and had a little standing, in a state agricultural bulletin that went out to every county in Oregon. The pamphlet was the hardest thing she ever did, harder than the walking. She was 34 and had perhaps 6 years of schooling, and she wrote that account 11 times over 2 winters, and burned 9 of them, because every version came out either too angry or too much like a girl asking to be taken seriously. The one she finally printed was plain to the point of dullness, his method, his figures, a list of wells with depths and dates, and one short paragraph at the end about the man himself, and it worked precisely because it was dull, because it read like what it was, which was 30 years of evidence. By the time Junia Alder was 60, the phrase people used in that country was not Old Obi Renn. It was the Renn books, and later, just Renn. The way you say a word for a thing everybody has and nobody questions. Is there a Renn on this section? And there were men using that phrase in 1930 who had no idea it had once been a man. Merritt Skaggs, the auctioneer who had told her she'd wasted her dollar in front of witnesses, lived another 20 years and drank his water. For the last 11 of them, out of a well that Wiley Stack put down on Renn's figures behind his own house. He mentioned it to Junia once, awkwardly at a county fair, and she let him off easy, because she had learned by then that most people who laugh at a thing are only repeating what the room laughed at, and that a room can be changed. She never married and lived alone in a small house in Sagehen with the trunk in the front room, and she was, by the time she was old, the person that end of the state sent for when a well went dry, a woman in her 70s walking a draw with a satchel of canvas notebooks, looking at the color of the grass. She was asked once, late, by a young man from a newspaper what she thought when she opened that trunk and found there was no gold in it. He had come out from Portland expecting a story about buried treasure, and she could see the disappointment settle on him as she talked. She said there was no gold in it, and there was water in it, and in that country only a fool would tell you which one is worth more. If you go to Sagehen today, and there is still a town there, small in a stretch of country where a good many towns did not make it, the trunk is in the county museum on the main street. Open, with the field books stacked in it exactly as they were stacked when a girl of 20 and an old well driller lifted the lid. On the wall behind it hangs one of the hand-drawn township maps, and beside that a framed page from Book 14, dated 1878, showing the draw behind the Pettigrew place, and a note about an old channel at 55 to 70 feet. And there is a map of the county with 341 small marks on it, and a card underneath that says, "These are the wells," and a second card, in a plain firm hand, that Junia Alder wrote out herself and asked them to keep displayed, which says, "He was called a failure for 30 years by people drinking water he could have found for them." Ask before you laugh at a man's life's work. There is a kind of inheritance that has nothing to do with gold, and everything to do with paying attention to the thing nobody else is looking at. It waits in the locked boxes of the world's forgotten failures, not for the one who wants a fortune, but for the one who knows exactly what the overlooked thing is worth, because they grew up dying, for want of it. The world had told Junia Alder she was worthless the same way it had told that trunk it was a dead failure's rubbish, with a shut door and a low price, and a room full of people agreeing. It only ever takes one person who knows what water is worth to prove the world's cold arithmetic wrong. Junia Alder was 20 years old and kicked out. She had $1 silver to her name, and she spent it on a dead prospector's locked trunk at a sheriff's sale in the high desert of eastern Oregon. It was the best dollar she ever spent. If this story moved you, subscribe to the channel and share it with someone who needs to hear it. And tell us in the comments, do you know someone whose life's work was dismissed while they were alive? We'd love to hear your story. See you in the next one.